first place we'll go is just like some background on what got you into web development and kind of start with your story a bit, and then we'll get into the Next.js stuff after that.
Sure. We're going back a ways. I'm a little older. So back in grad school in the late 90s here, mid to late 90s, where I was first exposed to the web, and I thought it was cool, and we're talking Netscape 1.0. I got a copy of Adobe PageMill, which was, as far as I know, the first drag and drop editor. But I couldn't do everything that I wanted to do. So I dug in, I learned about Control U and viewing the source code. So I initially just learned HTML, and that was way back when the attributes, the width, and we weren't using CSS then either. We were putting it all in the elements. And I learned all of that in the late 90s. And then I went to work for a couple of different universities, not teaching that by any means. I have a master's from back then just in communication. I went into some of the administration, like going out and visiting high schools, and then eventually working way out west near the Colorado border at Colby Community College as a transfer and articulation counselor. So there are students there that needed to transfer to other universities. And at that point, they didn't have a web development class, and they asked me to teach it. So that was my first step in teaching web development. There we're talking about like 1999 or so. So it was still bare bones development,
right around the .com boom right there.
GeoCity, stuff like that, But yeah, it was the dot boom, and that's what actually happened next. And I remember from watching one of your previous interviews, you said you were into health and fitness.
Yep.
I was too, especially after I'd spent most of the 90s in college, kind of like Tommy Boy, which I'm referencing in the movie, but I spent a lot of time in school.
Yeah.
And, at that point, I had been going to the gym a lot, and I ended up opening a gym there in Colby, Kansas. We were selling sports nutrition, and I thought, hey, why not put this online? I'm seeing some other sites do this. And that turned into a big business, so much that I resigned from the university, ended up moving to Wichita, Kansas, ran that company till 2005, and I sold it to a company on the East Coast at that point. Did a few little things along the way. I've got at least one trinket here I could show you. Inc. Magazine Web Awards from 2000. I was in the return on investment category. I got third.
There you go. Nice.
So yeah, it was in the first dot boom, and that site was mostly all static. Before I sold it, we got into ASP a little bit, and we were using the active server pages, is what that means, from Microsoft. We were using the version before .NET, but we could put, insert a header and a footer and some things like that. I'd had some developers at the time that were more advanced than I was suggest that we build a database site, but my focus at that time was search engine optimization. And we would own pages for our products. And so I was big on knowing the static placement and how Google, and of course we're going back to some older search engines, but how they used to index those pages. And it was important, which brings us forward to Next.js, honestly, that we want to talk about today. Because, I love JavaScript and everything that we were doing with React and all that, but I could instantly see I wouldn't have used that for my business, because if you look at the HTML that's loaded initially, there's no product information. There's nothing to get an actual index from. And of course, the search engines could have changed, but I put myself in the shoes that I used to be in, and it wouldn't provide any of that information until the page was hydrated and you got all of that JavaScript in there, which didn't used to be the case. Just about the time I sold my company is when Gmail came out, like 2005, 2004, in that range. And Ajax was something that was big and new that everybody was excited about, which anybody listening, if you don't know what Ajax is, that's asynchronous JavaScript and XML. And suddenly we can see our email update on the page without reloading the page. But that was a new thing. I remember the old school where, let me see if I got any new emails, and we'd hit refresh,
Yeah. No, that's awesome. your background sounds really cool. It sounds like a lot of your kind of web development stuff came from like business use cases of like actually wanting to own that search engine optimization and learning kind of how that works, and understanding web development kind of helped you do that. So from that point in like 2005 to where you sold your fitness business, which congratulations, by the way, on that. That sounds like it went definitely well. So, do you mind me asking what the name of the business is? It might have been before I was really into fitness and stuff, but
it was affordablesupplements.com.
wow.
And the reason for that name specifically, because Yahoo used to be the biggest place for searches on the web, way back when Yahoo was way different than it is now. Yahoo was never a search engine. It was a search index by category. And I chose something that was a natural name that was towards the beginning of the alphabet with AFF. I mean, you would see a few businesses get by with AAA sports nutrition, but not many. They started catching all that.
Yeah.
Okay, you're just abusing this. We're not going to start every day with the letter A unless it really means something. So, yeah, that was the whole strategy. From the business name on, it was all about the search results.
Wow. And then for that business, was it basically like kind of content based where you would own certain pages for like people looking for best supplement to build muscle or best supplement to do this, and that's how they would kind of find your guys' products and stuff?
It was product specific because we were bringing in product just like we did to the gym. It just got to be where we were bringing in a lot more product. By the time we were finished, we had a warehouse in Wichita, a few retail stores. But so we would try to own the page for any specific product. The biggest company back then was EAS out of Golden, Colorado. And, like Myoplex was meal replacement, different proteins. So whatever that was. And I remember we had a few offers to buy the business, and I was flown to LA, and I was asked by an owner of a nutrition company, why are you number one for our product? I mean, all I could say was I built a better page than yours. I mean, it was a little blunt, but I understood search engine optimization at the time. I'm sure it's progressed, and I have not stayed in business, but at the time I knew what to do to get a page found. And it was based on just core principles that we still talk about even when we learn accessibility. Use an H1. What's your page? Put that the title. Use an H1 on the page to introduce the product. And then if they had some kind of byline for that, then we would take that down at a different header, and we would have our product description. And I just made sure everything was static and would load fast. We did optimize images the best we could even at that time. And then I also got into writing all of the code that we ran our warehouse, from customer service to our shipping. And of course, this is going way back again. I used Visual Basic, and it was Visual Basic 6 before .NET. And I tied that into a Microsoft SQL server, and we were scanning barcodes for everything, and you printing pick tickets, integrating with UPS, FedEx shipping stations. You could do all of that then. Once again, it's changed. But if you understand how the business works, and of course, if you're the owner and you want to save money, you're doing everything you can to automate every process.
Yeah. It sounds like your kind of technical chops there really gave you guys a huge advantage when it came to some of that back end stuff, as well as kind of people finding your products and stuff like that. So from that phase in like 2005, when you sold your company, how did you kind of get to where you are today? Is that when you kind of started teaching web development a bit more and kind of focusing on that, or what does that kind of next decade or so look like?
I did not immediately. Took some time off. Had kids. Did dad things for a while.
Yeah.
And it was nice. I took actually about 5 years or so off after selling the company, which, man, if you can do that right when your kids are born, I highly recommend it.
Yeah. I'll see if I have a company to sell that.
No, not everybody can do that. But
yeah,
I did that. You can see from the long hair, and if you watch any of my videos, different music references, I've always played in bands. So I played a lot of guitar, kind of got back to my roots on that. But eventually I'd say around 2013. Now, I did teach a few part-time classes for my alma mater, Fort Hays State University there. I did just occasionally when they asked me to, and my department was informatics. Now, not every university is structured like this, but at Fort Hays, the web development and some entrepreneurship classes are within the informatics department, which is separate from computer science, where more traditional computer science degree is. I know some universities put that together, and I know some others that don't also, like Dr. Chuck has videos on Free Code Camp, and he's up in Michigan at one of the universities. I can't remember which one, but he's also in the informatics department, if I remember correctly. So you just find, various universities organize things differently. I was teaching just an occasional part-time class for informatics, whether it was entrepreneurship, as I had business experience, or web development. But I didn't really get back into it until about 2013 or 14. And that's almost right when React came out. Everybody was still using jQuery at the time, so I remember still teaching some jQuery. And it's nice to see vanilla JavaScript has got to the point where you don't really need that. But that's when I dove back in. And about 2015, I decided, hey, I like this. I'm going to dive in head first. And I began teaching full-time at the university then for 3 years. And I would still be, if I didn't get asked by a friend I graduated college with, actually, to come work for his company as a full-time developer. And education's great, and I still am involved in education, but industry pays a little bit better. So it was kind of luring me away. But I have stayed involved with Fort Hays, so I teach front-end development all online, and Fort Hays State University has a huge online enrollment from all around the world. But I teach front-end development 1 in the fall and back-end development 1 every spring semester. So just to stay involved in education, which is really what I'm passionate about doing.
And that definitely comes through on your YouTube channel as well, to where I think that you do an awesome job of clearly explaining things. And I think sometimes you just know to explain something from what I would assume is from your teaching background, in which you get asked this question a lot, so you automatically kind of cover that in some of your free courses that you put, and do an awesome job with that. So kind of with that, and with that, you kind of got into React a little bit more with kind of in 2013, 2014, and React was kind of, gaining market share, doing a really good job for several years there. And then we got this other kind of framework that came out called Next.js. And I don't remember exactly when Next.js came out, but it was at least a handful of years ago now. Do you remember when it kind of came out a handful of years ago?
Exact year. And I'm not an early adopter, honestly. Unless I get demand on my channel for something, I just kind of like it to get shook out. We'll see if we want to use this or not. And even with React, when it came out and I was first introduced to it and it was all class component based, I didn't like it. It was until they switched to hooks that I started to like React, really. But I had so many requests for Next.js on my channel. I've got to where I just post community polls on the community tab for YouTube and, ask, what do you want to see next? And I did that last year, and the MERN stack was the number one request. So I did a free course series. What I do on my channel is I break it into individual videos and create a series over maybe 12 weeks. And I never have it mapped out, really. I just think, what do I need to cover next? And then if I feel like, okay, we've completed everything, or if I even need to tag something on at the end after I thought it was completed, I can do that. But then a little while after it's completed, I'll make a compilation video. Those compilation videos seem to be what's more popular, and they may have some edits in there. I may put a few notes from questions I've been asked overall, but mostly it's the same content. But kind of like on Free Code Camp, they're longer videos. The big full course videos seem to be popular. And that's what I'm seeing on my channel. So you get that individual trickle of lessons, like 1 per week on Next.js is what I did. And then I did the compilation after that. And I've continued to add some content as we go. But I probably wouldn't have dove into it that fast because I'm not an early adopter. And of course, the app router was new. And I would say it's the most challenging series I've completed because when I started, in just 12 weeks' time, they went from 13.1 to 13.4. And I think it's 13.6 now. Little bugs along the way and everything. I mean, you can look at their GitHub and there's tons of issues, but they're putting in a lot of effort. I'm not dogging on them in any way.
Right.
They've got a really good thing going. I do really like it, and I can see why I would continue to choose it.
Yeah, and I did notice that in your video as well. While I was watching your video, I know like after maybe the first hour, it sounded like you maybe put an edit in there of, okay, Next.js has now released the app router, and this is how this would look in the app router. I was like, oh man, I hope he didn't have to like redo this entire like 7-hour course because of this, but yeah.
No, I decided when I put that compilation together, since the versions were changing throughout those 12 weeks, I decided I was just going to add little inserts in the compilation to say, okay, if you want to follow along and have it behave exactly like it is for me, here's the version you need, so that tends to help. If you try just installing the latest, they break things along the way, or they've discarded something and changed it. So in particular, I remember the lesson on mutations and also on revalidation, which is ISR, that incremental static regeneration. They changed the way those things work. The revalidation has totally changed, and so you need to do it the new way. The mutations, you can still do it the old way, but now we're moving into something new with server actions too, which that's something I wouldn't have covered as soon as I did either, but I had requests for that after they came out with it, so I thought I'll go ahead and do it, but I'm going to note all along the way, this is alpha, not even beta yet, so just expect this to change. And I always tell students and viewers as well, I guess, but just always go back and look at the docs. And I've been asked, how do you know this stuff? It's like, I don't know it all up here. I have to reference every day.
Yeah. Absolutely. And, sometimes you learn something really well and then you step away for it for a couple of years. And it's like, I'm definitely going back to those docs to remember how to install this package, how this exact structure of this like function call works from this library and different things like that. So I think that gives us a really good background and really good understanding of kind of that movement towards, your career here to this point. So now to kind of get into Next.js a bit more. So I think like the first question that are probably on people's minds is like, why would someone even decide to use Next.js when, we have React and great React app? People are probably used to that structure over the last, several years of single page applications. Why would someone then decide to learn Next.js? What kind of benefits does it offer?
It's got a lot of benefits, honestly. I mean, any framework is going to attempt to add things to what was already there, what is being built on top of, and it's going to try to make things simpler, but it's usually opinionated in how it does it. So, for example, in a React project, which all React pages are single page applications. I've had viewers and students ask, well, when I refresh my app, it loses the state. And I said, yeah, it's just a single page. So even if it appears to be extra pages, that's just because of something we put on top of it. It's still a single page, you're going to lose the state. But I would put React Router, for example, in a React app to make it appear that I'm going to different pages. Well, Next.js does this differently, but it's built in. So there's no extra dependency to add. And I like how it does. I know some that don't like how this is, and it's just kind of an opinion on the file structure, but it is opinionated about that. So you have to organize your directories, your folders, in a specific way that Next.js wants you to do this. And each time you do that and you're in a sub-level or, you go down one directory, you're going to have another, I'm using TypeScript here, but page.tsx file. So you could end up with a lot of files named the same thing, but they're in different directories based on how your app is laid out. And those directories represent the path names or your tree or a subtree or how, it just depends on how much of it you're referring to.
Yep. So Next.js, one of the features it offers is this opinionated kind of routing system of instead of doing like npm install React Router DOM and then creating calling a function to create your router and create these different routes and put in all that boilerplate in place. Instead, if you kind of abide by the different folder structure conventions in Next.js, when you create a folder and create a page.js or TSX or whatever it is within that folder, that page, it will then create a route for that page. Does it sound like I'm understanding that correctly?
Yeah. I mean, it's built into the app structure itself. And so there's no extra code to add for the routing. It's just in how you set up those directories within your project. So, I mean, I like that. It got rid of some of the boilerplate, and it's easy for me to view in my file tree as well. So I like that structure, and I know not everybody does, but it is opinionated about that. And something else, because you asked why would people like this, and this goes back to what I talked about with a business and being found in the search engines. We're really considering having this static content and served as quickly as possible. We really only need to put client components where we want that interactivity. And I think a common misconception here is I've been asked, should I use a server component or a client component? But you don't have to choose. It's not either or. The Next team does recommend you fetch data whenever possible in a server component. I agree. So I would say create a parent server component. And then if you need interactivity, put in a client component where you need that. Say you're adding something to your cart, that might be a client component there, but the product description and other things on the page, you could actually have statically generated. I think that's a big plus here, and that's what we discussed earlier. Rather than just sending in this empty skeleton of HTML and then hydrating your entire app with all the JavaScript bundles. If you've looked at, after building a project, it's in these chunks, and here it all comes. I can only imagine how slow that would have been if, back in the day when we were all on dial-up level.
Oh, God.
That's why we wanted to render everything in PHP or active server pages back then and then send it down from the server. Well, now, and Next.js, this new version, is really being compared to PHP in several ways, but in good ways, because this creates some static content that can then be sent out to those content delivery networks and served, at the server, the location closest to you, and it gets there faster. It can be indexed. That static content is good. There's no reason to generate all of that all the time with JavaScript. So get what you can out of that, and then just put in the little interactivity where you need it. And I think I've said this a time or two, and I think I might have originally heard the reference from Jack Harrington, who we've had on here, but said islands of interactivity. That's how I like to view it, because you can just have little spots in your app where you need it. So you don't have to choose, like, this whole page doesn't have to be a client component, just where you need it.
Yep, and I think I've listened to Dan Abramov on server components and stuff, and I think he's kind of talked about it as you're just filling in holes of your application with these client components where you need interactivity, and then everything else, it can be rendered on the server. And if it's completely static, it can be built at or be rendered at build time and then put on these CDNs and different things like that to improve performance. So is the main benefit of kind of this server rendering that it's going to increase performance, and then also you'll have more data when your application is shipped. So for search engine optimization, it kind of also helps that. So kind of performance and SEO are two of the biggest kind of benefits of doing that.
I really see it that way. Think about a blog, for example, and I know that's one of the classic applications. You think about building something with a Jamstack is a blog, and Next.js is Jamstack. And that essentially means you're rendering pages ahead of time, making them static. Trying to think of the acronym right now is like JavaScript and Markdown, something like that.
Yeah, I think so.
And that's essentially what a blog can be. And the final project there in my Next.js course is we're using remote MDX files that I'm simply hosting in a GitHub repository. We're pulling those in, but that's nice because MDX you can insert components into. So you get components of code snippets for your blog, components of images, and so on. You can just insert all of that where needed. Now those aren't necessarily client components, but I suppose they, it just depends how you set it all up. I didn't dive that deep into it, but I put in what I would normally put in a blog post. But overall, yeah, those are huge benefits because, and you've got a couple of run times too, by the way, which is something that I didn't explain in the course because it's a little bit deeper than somebody would just be learning the fundamentals of Next.js, but it's going to run in a serverless environment. Behind the scenes, they're taking all these functions and server components that you have, and it's not really like your monolithic PHP server back in the day. It's kind of getting all wrapped up in a Lambda function that they've got AWS behind the scenes. So you're running serverless functions. And now if it's constantly, requests, if it's constantly hit with requests, well, then it's going to stay awake. But you can have also what they call a cold boot or cold start time. It could be a few 100 milliseconds in there. And I'm actually going to make a video about this soon because I think that's not always realized how that works. And Vercel overall is a serverless host by default. Now, you do have an edge runtime also that can be used, but it doesn't have access to all the Node.js APIs. There are some limitations there. But I mean, look at everything you can do now. You've got SQL that runs on the edge, PlanetScale and a few others do that. And now you can get your functions, any simple functions you could run on the edge as well with Next.js and Vercel. If not, serverless isn't bad. I don't mean to make it sound like serverless is way slower than the edge. It's still pretty good. But there's a difference there that I want to distinguish, hopefully in a video here very soon. And so it's not the same as like I can't have something running on the server all the time that I expect to just stay awake.
Right. Gotcha. Cool. And I think maybe the last couple of things to touch on here quickly, I know we're coming up on time here, but you mentioned earlier that for data fetching in Next.js, they kind of recommend doing this in server components. So maybe we could just touch on quickly, how does kind of data fetching work in Next.js? I know they have in their docs, they mention a couple of cool features like automatic deduping requests, and they kind of recommend kind of co-locating your data fetching to the component that needs it, and deduping helps you from preventing multiple requests. But how does kind of data fetching work, and maybe what are some features that Next.js kind of offers when it comes to data fetching?
Well, the deduping is great, but they've extended fetch, by the way. So you've got features there where you can tell it for the cache, no store, I don't want this cached. Otherwise, by default, it's going to cache. And that could play a role if you don't understand the difference between hard navigation and soft navigation, which that's one thing I highlighted actually in the mutations chapter I had there in my course, because you could make a change on one page, and then if you navigate back to the next, you wouldn't see the update. And that's because there's actually a kind of a seldom talked about front-end cache also that's holding on to that, and it's going to serve that unless in a client component, you need to call router refresh. Now, they may have updated this because I did highlight in that lesson that they had plans on that. And I wanted to show students, hey, you can go to GitHub and you can look at the issues and find something like this where they say how they're going to fix it. But until then, I showed a way to do it, and that was with router refresh. So that's fetching there. Just that they've extended and add a few things too. They do recommend doing it in a server component, and from my experience, I agree with that. And here's another mistake that I've been asked, and I've seen it posted on the web also. Like, why can't I request something from my API route in my Next.js app from a server component? I'm getting a build error. What's going on? Well, if you stop and think about it, the server component needs that data when it builds to generate a static page. But if the API route, or the route handler as they now call them, if the route handler is part of the same project and is being built at the same time, it's not available then to get that data from. And there's really no reason to use a route handler request in a server component because you can just make the same request right from the server. They're both running on the server. So it might not be that it would be impossible, but let me give you a clear situation where this would not work. If you're creating a static page, and this is where deduplication comes in also, you're creating a static page that will end up being SSG, which is static site generation, you need to use the generate static params. So you're going to need to make that request in that function to get all the data that's going to generate those static params that you're going to generate that with. Then you may need to request the same data to put that in your other function that actually displays the data on the page as well. And then you might even want to generate metadata, because this is, say, all in a dynamic route that is supported. And so, like the posts for a blog is one good example. So maybe you've had to request that data 3 times. The Next.js will deduplicate all 3 of those requests. They're all for the same data, so there's no reason to actually request it 3 times. So that's a good example of that. Now, a client component, when I talked about server components not really needing to request from a route handler, a client component can, and there's actually no issue with that. And it could be a good thing, because maybe your API keys or other things can stay hidden on the server. Then you can insert those environment variables when it's handled in the route, rather than ever sending those to the client, which is ideal.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And I think that their docs also mentions that with trying to keep things in server components a bit more, if you're using like some more weighty packages and stuff like that, you can also keep those on the server and not ship all that code to the client as well. And there are a couple of they mentioned a couple of gotchas to where if you use there's ways that you can accidentally kind of use some of these server side components and libraries, and they kind of sneak into your client components, and then you end up shipping everything to the browser anyways. So you do have to be a little bit careful about that as well.
Yeah, think about the structure there for sure. One other thing we didn't discuss on Fetch, and definitely had some questions on this, and I did feature some of this in video, was the waterfalls here, where you don't want to make one request. Okay, now I'm awaiting that data. Got it. Now let's make the next request, because maybe you need data from 2 or 3 different places. You can go ahead and start all of those requests without a wait. Just kick them off, then drop them all in a promise all and await that, so you get all the data at once there. And I don't know, the different developers you've had discussions with and everything, but then you get technically, then you're in for the discussion. But because they start using parallel, and somebody's like, don't they mean concurrent? And I say, well, look at the docs. They said parallel, so I'm saying parallel, so there's no confusion. But I'm not going to dive into that, all those little nitpicky things. My whole thing on my channel, I say strive for progress, not perfection, because believe me, I know I can get hung up that way too. So it's as much a reminder for myself. Let's keep making progress every day. I can spend 3 different hours over here. Maybe this is a Kansas phrase, but splitting hairs,
No, it's a Midwest phrase. I definitely think that growing up in Iowa as well.
Yeah, get all the little details worked out, but does it really matter? Or do we know how it works and we can move on and continue to make progress?
Yep, absolutely. And you know where a comment on YouTube is going right away when they start it with, well, actually, and it's just like, oh God, here we go. But yeah, I think you did an awesome job in your course as well of being like, hey guys, stuff is going to change all the time in this library, different little function calls and stuff like this. But if you conceptually understand the big ideas of Next.js when it comes to server-side rendering versus client-side rendering, and how they kind of do the routing system and different things like that, if you understand the concepts, even if little details change, it's really not going to matter much in the long run, and you're still going to put yourself in a really good spot. So I think with that, Dave, we're kind of up on time here. Is there any kind of last kind of big mistakes that people make when using Next.js, or anything that you wanted to mention regarding Next.js before we kind of end it here?
I think I hit the big ones, especially where I'm asked about what do I use, a client side or a server side component, for example. We discussed that. I do get asked about state management a lot, and what should I request data with? Like they say, if you need to request data from a client component, the docs recommend, say, SWR or React query. Those are good. You can just use fetch, as they have extended it. But ask yourself, is it a small project? Do you need a client-side state management system at all? because you can do a lot on the server. So just as I talked about PlanetScale and others already deploying, MySQL to the edge, how much do you really need to manage in the client? And if that's not a huge amount, maybe you can get by without any extra state management dependency. Because you have to remember, all of those were designed for React that are client side, that are just intended to keep that state in sync with the server. So there could actually be valid reasons for using them, but you really want to think, do I need to, before you drop in all that extra weight, because that does get sent to the client.
Yep. And that kind of also circles to like premature optimization and kind of doing things maybe before you need to. And I know that, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Ken Dodds, but he like does a lot of React content as well. And one thing that I've heard him mention, or I believe I've heard him mention, I've listened to a lot of different people, so I could be messing this up, but I think he's kind of talked about how React in itself has a state management system with use state and use reducer and stuff like that. And you can go a long ways with just built-in kind of React stuff before pulling in another library like, Redux, or I think like ZooStand's getting popular, different things like that as well. So
yeah, and you see simple tutorials. I've done them as well, where okay, this is how you use it. I've got a popular video on Redux toolkit and RTK query. But I'm using simple examples. If I was just really creating a blog app, I might not need to pull in all that extra weight. Although clearly it can be done, and that's a good way to show how it's used. But that's just to get familiar with it. It's an enterprise level where you might really need that.
Mm-hmm. Yep, absolutely. Well, I think this was a great discussion here, Dave. I really enjoyed actually the first part talking about your business as well. So hopefully, the listeners feel the same way. But if people want to, we've been referring kind of to your courses and different things. Where can people kind of go to kind of find some of that content, or to kind of follow the latest things that you're doing?
Yeah, my YouTube channel is Dave Gray Teaches Code, and I tried to keep it simple. There's a lot of people with my name. There's even the famous singer David Gray, so I had to add something else on there.
Yeah.
So yeah, overall, Dave Gray Teaches Code, and then that will link to pretty much everything else, I think.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on today.
Hey, thank you for having me. I've enjoyed talking to you, and you're right down the road as far as the U.S. goes.